Chapter 1. Why is the traditional approach to changing people's mind ineffective? What do you do when you need people to see things from your perspective, but it just isn't working? You'd provide more facts and evidence to show them why your idea proposition is better, right? Research conducted by Jonah Berger revealed that's what 99% of people would do in such situations. People are more emotional than logical when making decisions. Don't feed them with facts. Persuade them instead. The general approach out there is to coax, convince, and encourage people to change. And if that doesn't work, you try again, and again, and again. But we all know that it still wouldn't yield any encouraging results. Rather than thinking up newer ways to convince people, isn't it more fruitful to answer the question, why hasn't this person changed? What is blocking them? Answering these questions effectively will show you how to move that person from inertia to action. In chemistry, catalysts are responsible for speeding up the rates of chemical reactions, and they do this by simply identifying and removing the barriers limiting chemical reactions. You too can become a social catalyst who knows how to identify and remove barriers to change. This book is about teaching you to become that social catalyst. It was born out of several years of research and study on the subject of social change. Jonah Berger found that there are 5 barriers between individuals and organizations from moving from inertia to action. In this summary, we shall examine them one after the other, unearth the science underlying each barrier, and then show you how to overcome them. Get set for a ride of a lifetime. Chapter 2. Restriction creates reactance, which keeps people from doing what you want them to do. People hate to be pushed. It doesn't matter their age or social status. Adults hate to be told what to do as much as teens don't like to be restricted. As a matter of fact, restriction is one of the leading causes of social conflict. When people feel restricted, they react back to regain the perceived threat on their freedom. The easiest way to persuade people is to make them feel they are in charge of the situation. Even when people know that the restriction is for their own good, they will still react in the negative when they perceive a threat. It's like saying, so what if I do what you don't want me to do? It's my life. I can do whatever I want. That's exactly what happens when a driver texts while driving, even when he knows he shouldn't do it. It's the same thing when a teenager falls more in love with his high school girlfriend after his parents tell him to put an end to the relationship. We naturally want to prove a point when we perceive a threat on our rights. If we want to succeed in making people act in the way we want them to, then we must find a way to make them feel that they are making the decisions themselves, and not because someone wants them to. There are a couple of strategies you can implement to make this work. Provide a menu. If you enter a Chinese restaurant today, you'll be given a menu from which you'll choose what you desire to eat. In doing so, the restaurant gives you the freedom to choose what you want, and that way, you have value for your money. But there's one thing you should notice. You can't eat German, Italian, or food from any other culture, but Chinese food, so long as you only choose from that menu. But you will be perfectly okay with it. Now, imagine you entered a general restaurant where Chinese, Italian, and German foods are available, but the waiter tells you to only eat mapo tofu because it's good for your health. Boom! Your sense of freedom is already at threat, and the normal response from the average Joe will be to reject the advice. Ask, don't tell. This is another powerful way to avoid reactance. Telling people that junk foods are bad for them isn't nearly as effective as asking, is that junk food good for you? This sort of question immediately puts the person in a tight spot. And yes, they are wise enough to know junks aren't good for them. They will ponder on the question and make a choice for themselves. Highlight a gap. This strategy helps the person you're trying to influence to see the gap between the advice they will give others and what they're doing themselves. For instance, no responsible adult would want their teenager to be on the phone while driving at high speed, no matter the situation. But some of these adults do it. Highlighting the gap will, however, instantly make them realize their wrongs and then adjust. Understanding. This strategy is all about listening to the people you want to influence. Getting to know them, identifying what makes them tick and what makes them do the things they do. You will be amazed at how powerful this strategy is. Sometimes all people need to know is that someone understands them. One more importance of understanding people is that you get to gain insights you can use to influence their decisions. Did you know? Human beings are notoriously curious creatures. It's this curiosity that leads us to try things labeled forbidden, even when we truly don't desire them. Chapter 3. People don't change because it's hard to break existing patterns. It's tough to let go of things we're used to, and it doesn't matter whether it's the big things in life, like career change, or simple decisions like changing a mobile phone. When we use certain materials or strategies for so long, we develop natural fondness for those materials or ways of doing things. It is that inertia that keeps us from accepting newer products or systems. What people consider in the face of change is known as switching cost. We subconsciously compare the potential losses to the potential gains to see which outweighs the other. It's very tricky at this point because people naturally won't accept change if the potential gain only slightly outweighs the potential loss. An example will illustrate this. Just imagine you're at a lottery. You pay $100 to sign up for the lottery. After signing up, a coin will be tossed. If the head shows, you win $100, but if it's the tail, you lose your $100. Will you play the game? If you're anything like the billions of people out there, you will respond in the negative. Research has shown that people won't take their chances unless the potential gain is at least 2.6 times more than the potential loss. Putting the 2.6x factor into the previous example, will you play the game if you could win $260? Likely. Here's the trick. If you want people to act, show them the immense benefits of taking the action you want them to take, and make them see what they could lose if they don't. That's the psychology sports betting companies use. They make you see that you could bet with as little as $100 and rake in millions, and they show you proofs upon proofs from lucky winners. What they're actually doing is making you see that you could win millions if you try, and that you lose the chance to get rich if you don't. Now that you know how endowment has a serious impact on change, what can you do as a catalyst to make people move from inertia to action? There are two things you could do. Number 1, surface the cost of inaction. And number 2, burn the ships. Surface the cost of inaction. People pay serious attention to switching cost, so much so that they often neglect the cost of not making a move at all. If you're losing sales because your customers are patronizing a cheaper brand, then you're already in a tight spot. You could compromise on quality to sell cheaper, but that would mean losing customers who put quality over price. But staying inert and doing nothing about your situation wouldn't be so helpful because you're already losing some customers. Either way, you have to act. If you're able to make people see the cost of inaction and then introduce them to the benefit of making a move, then you will be able to win them over. This is definitely more effective than trying to push them into action. Burn the ship. Oftentimes, when the option is between action and inaction, people tend to go with inaction. These sort of people need a little push. This is where burning the ship comes in. By removing the inactive option, people have no choice but to act. If you're running IT for a company, for example, and some staff members are unwilling to adapt to the new technology you brought on board, despite explaining how beneficial it will be to them, you could burn the ship by giving them genuine reasons why you'd stop fixing the old technology when it gets faulty. This sort of move always gets people to act. Chapter 4. Confirmation bias and how it affects decision-making. At the start of the summary, we hinted that facts and scientific information are not necessarily enough to make people change their minds, but we didn't tell you why. Confirmation bias is the culprit. Ideally, the mindset a person has about anything affects his response to facts and figures that are meant to provide information about that thing. That's what psychologists call confirmation bias. For instance, Mr. A, who believes there is a link between vaccination and autism in children, is more likely to believe a report that supports this theory compared to Mrs. B, who has a contrary belief. In the end, it's not the scientific facts and figures that really count, but the beliefs held by people. Faulty beliefs make it harder to convince people. Your facts are useless if the person you're trying to persuade has beliefs contrary to what you're telling them. But for someone with favorable beliefs, they are a great weapon. It's easier to move people when they share the same beliefs as you do. But what can you do when they do not? Here's what you can do. If you're dealing with a group, then identify those whose beliefs incline them to buy into your product or ideas and sell it to them. Eventually, many of these people will become advocates, helping convince other people. Don't begin by trying to convince the crowd. You would fail that way. Instead, start by niching around those who believe in the ideas or products you're putting forth. For those that don't support what you're selling, don't go hard on them. You should start by encouraging them to make little changes. For instance, as a medical personnel whose patient needs to lose weight, you shouldn't start by telling him to exercise daily, change his entire diets tomorrow, and give up on his favorite hobbies. That's definitely what he should do in theory, but it doesn't work that way in practice. Instead, you have to begin by encouraging him to make little changes and adjustments, which he'd gladly make. Chapter 5. Remove uncertainties so that people can act without fear. Another reason people prefer to hold on to their normal ways of life rather than embrace change is the fear of the unknown. Generally, it's better to not make a move when you don't know the possible outcomes. It becomes even more serious when the stakes are high. What do catalysts do in situations like this? They go the extra mile to remove the uncertainty barrier. Jaquette worked in the customer service department of a bank for many years. Through experience and research, he discovered that the bank was losing customers and that it was due to poor customer service. He brought the issue to management, suggesting a modification in customer experience. He wanted the customers to be wowed and delighted each time they came to the bank. It only took small gestures of kindness to make it work, but as you would expect, management rejected his idea. He persisted until he could persuade no more. None of the strategies he used in convincing management worked. He got tired and frustrated, but decided to try just one last straw before giving up. This time, he would give the senior staff members a taste of what customers were to experience. He worked with a small group of junior staff and ensured every staff in management received special treatment on their special days. They didn't do anything big. They only came up with creative, emotional, and personal ways to make senior staff members feel special and appreciated on occasions like their wedding anniversary, birthdays, or when they accomplished something amazing for the company. The gestures were little, but they touched the hearts of the receivers in very special ways. His proposition was accepted the next time he brought it on board. Why was it suddenly easy to accept? Because Jaquette gave the board members a taste of what customers were to experience. That move was all that was needed to remove the uncertainty barrier. Do everything you can to make sure the people you're trying to persuade don't have a reason to say no. So far, we've discussed 4 reasons why people repel change and what you can do about them. In the next chapter, we will look closely on how a catalyst can move people to action even when he has little evidence to support his ideas. Chapter 6. Be like a salesman. Provide so much proof your prospects don't have a reason to refuse you. Imagine a stranger walks up to you on the street and begins to advertise his bank to you, telling you how great the bank is and why you need to have an account with them. Would you choose to bank with them? It probably depends on how well the salesman pitched the idea to you. But on a general note, you're not likely to be convinced easily. But if that stranger was your close friend who has worked in that particular bank for half a decade, hell no, you wouldn't entertain so many thoughts before taking their recommendations seriously. This is why word-of-mouth advertising still remains the best form of advertising. As much as you can, take advantage of your authority, track records, experiences, and expertise to persuade people. Your job is easier that way. Sometimes you have to provide more proof before people can accept what you're selling them. The salesman above, for example, would have to play his cards well before he closes. But your friend wouldn't need to provide so much evidence. What's the difference? You trust your friend's judgment more because he's someone you're familiar with. The extent you go to provide evidence is dependent on the severity of the change you're requesting. If you want people to make big changes, then be sure that they won't be easily convinced, which just goes to say that you need to provide more evidence. This may include facts, scientific reports, as well as individual evidence from various sources, to prove that many people or organizations are adopting the same change or are at least saying the same thing. Conclusion. People will continue to do what they are doing, or not doing, until an external force comes to remove that inertia. It is your job as a catalyst to not only show people why they need to change, but to equally show them the benefits of change. It's also important to show them how to make a move. This means providing enough information so they see the need for change. Going the extra mile to explain the cost of inaction, asking them for little changes, removing uncertainties, and finding corroborative evidence. Basically, a catalyst is in the game of persuasion. You're in every way like a salesman, and your job is to make sure people have absolutely no reason for refusing what you present them. Sometimes you need to work hard to make this happen, but the effort is worth it. Try this. Remember, we said the first thing you need to do is change people's mind in understanding why they don't want to change. A good way to gain this understanding quickly is by actively listening to them. Become an active listener, and you would learn things about people that you otherwise wouldn't have known. To practice actively listening, you have to approach each conversation with the goal of learning something. See the other person as someone you can actively learn from. Listen attentively and ask open-ended questions that show you're interested in the conversation.